Hello everybody, it's Rin Longmaid at Rin Longmaid Restaurant Sales and Consulting. I work at Santa Rosa Business and Commercial here in Sonoma County. Today Ed, hi Ed,
Hey.
and I are up in Healdsburg. It's St. Patrick's Day and we're live streaming from, lo and behold, bar and kitchen. If you might have just seen, Ed and I just did a really quick live stream with the owners. I helped them get their Type 47 license here. So Deep Dish Live, this series, it airs once monthly. It is discussions on the business of restaurants for restaurateurs, restaurant buyers and sellers, and the restaurant curious. Each episode, they're getting shorter and shorter just by necessity. We live stream from one of your favorite local San Francisco North Bay area restaurants, and every time we come to you, we offer a gift card from our host restaurant. So last month, Ed and I were at Legit Provisions, and I'll announce the gift card winner at the end of this episode. And then today we're at, as I said, lo and behold. If you like and comment on this post here while we live stream from Facebook, or anytime between now and next month, you can do it on LinkedIn, Insta, my Facebook page. We don't do it on YouTube. I can't. But if you say something about this post when you see it between now and April, mid-April, you could have a chance to win a $100 gift card to Lo and Behold. So today I'm talking more on leases. We've spent the last couple episodes talking about restaurant leases. Whenever I'm here before you, I am always talking about the subject in connection with buying and selling a restaurant. So today I'm going to talk about restaurant leases and the options to renew term. The term option pops up all over the place with commercial leases, but today in specific, I'm talking about the option to renew term. So I'm going to cover, one thing I want to say too is terminology. So you're going to hear me maybe interchangeably use landlord and lessor. That's the same thing. The seller is always the lessee. They're the one who holds the lease, and then there's the buyer of the restaurant, and they're going to be maybe the signee of the lease, because that lease might get assigned, and we'll talk about that. So I'll probably use a bunch of terms, and if it gets confusing, you can always reach out to me. Texting is always best. And take a sip of water. So when somebody buys a restaurant, in the contract it says one of the contingencies are agreeable lease term to both buyer and seller, because how the lease is negotiated is going to have bearing certainly to the buyer, but also to the seller, and I'll get to that. So what landlords most often do, if they approve the buyer after the buyer and seller are in contract for the buyer to buy the restaurant, we go to the landlord and we'll present the landlord with the buyer's financials and things like that. Almost always the landlord is going to assign the existing lease to the buyer. And what will happen is the seller is inside of a term on that lease. They may say they have 2 years left of the existing term, and then behind that they have options to renew. That's what I'm here to talk about. And they're generally a restaurant lease, you can see everything, but let's say when a lease is first written, it's usually a 5-year base term with 2 5-year options. It could be anything. It could be a 15-year lease, but today we'll say 5-year base term, 2 5-year options. So if the seller sells it to the buyer goes to the landlord, the landlord will definitely, if the buyer's approved, assign the current term, the 2 years. But often what happens inside of the option, there's almost every lease has it. It says that the option is personal to the original optionor, meaning the original leaseholder. I know I'm saying something good because Ed always responds to me, just his eyebrows went up. So what that means is, if I'm the restaurant operator and I'm selling it, those options are mine. The landlord's under complete obligation to exercise those options given certain conditions, which I'll talk about. But the landlord is not obligated to assign those options over to the buyer. That's a big deal. But most people, when they're negotiating leases, if they're not working with either a qualified restaurant broker or a commercial real estate agent, they don't know that. So oftentimes if I'm working on an assignment, I will I'll read what the terms of the options are, and I'll ask in the assignment that there's a clause that says that those options transfer over to the buyer. Now let's say that the seller has only 2 years left, period, no options, or the seller is on month to month, no longer even has a lease. That's not a problem in selling a restaurant, because we're always going to be doing something with the buyer and the landlord, so we could easily create a new lease. It's not a barrier. I mean, it puts the seller in a vulnerable position, because at any minute the landlord could issue a 30-day notice, or whatever the terms of the lease are, to vacate the premises for the seller. But in any event, so let's say if there are no options and they're in the base term, the landlord may want to assign that, and then the buyers do not want to spend top dollar, $300,000, $350,000, $500,000, $1 million on a successful restaurant with no lease term. Because if you have no lease term, you literally don't have your business. You're super vulnerable for that landlord to issue the notice to vacate. So I'm talking about three things. That's the assignment. The other one is sometimes landlords will say, I'm going to terminate the seller's current lease and write a new lease with the buyer. Now, landlords don't often do that, because with an assignment, the landlord doesn't have to negotiate all the terms. All the terms are there. Doesn't have to pay an attorney to write a new lease. Doesn't have to go back and forth with the buyer, just like the landlord had gone back and forth with the seller on negotiating all those terms. It's a rather long and arduous process. So, but sometimes landlords want to do that. The cool thing for the seller is, if the landlord does that, the seller gets to sell and is gone, free and clear, because the seller's lease will be terminated and the landlord's issuing a new lease to the buyer. Because this isn't my topic today, but when a landlord assigns a lease from a seller to a buyer, 99 times out of 10, that seller, the language is in the lease, the landlord cannot unreasonably withhold the assignment to a buyer, but the landlord can keep the original holder of the lease, the seller, on the lease even as it transfers to the buyer. So basically, the seller can sit as a guarantor on that lease, at least for the current term, maybe for the whole lease through all the options. When I sold my restaurant, I was on the hook for 15 years on my lease. So if any operator after me was to default, I might be sitting further and further back as it sells through different operators, because my restaurant, the concept that I put together with the menu and the recipes, I had it for 5 years. I sold it. It operated under the same lease with the same concept for 5 years. That operator sold it. And this is great for our conversation today, the final owner of the restaurant unfortunately didn't exercise the option, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, did not exercise the option, so they were on month to month, and they were in contract to sell to another buyer, and the landlord sold it to sold the real property, and the buyer of the real property wanted to own and occupy, wanted to execute on their own business inside of that real property. It's rare. Most of the time, landlords at this level of retail are in the business of collecting rent. That's their business model. They don't usually typically buy the commercial real property and then also run the business out of that real property, but in this case it did. So unfortunately, the final owner of my restaurant was unable to sell the restaurant because they did not have lease term. So that's the assignment of the lease, original lease, and then last but not least, and I'll end here, exercising the option. Oh my gosh, it's Shakespearean, you guys. Inside the lease, there will be the clause about how the current owner of the lease is to exercise that option, and the term is something like, you have to contact the landlord in writing, not in a phone call, maybe an email, maybe conventional mail, sometimes a text. Texting is coming into the legal realm these days. But the current operator in the space, the leaseholder, has to communicate to the landlord in a very strict time boundary to exercise that option. And I think it's something like, you have to contact the landlord. So let's say the current term that the restaurant operator is here. So, they're operating here, current term here expires, and now we're into an option, or we're in month to month. So if it expires here, the term is the operator has to contact the landlord no sooner than 9 months before the expiration. So can't contact the landlord 10 months before the expiration. No sooner than 9 months, and no later than 6 months. So there's this 3-month window. Okay, but notice they're not saying dates. They're not tying that date to the dates that that are bound in the lease. You know, the lease commencement, because it's tied. That's the date that it's tied to, is the lease commencement. And I can tell you, just like the last owner of the restaurant that I had owned and operated, it went off their radar to exercise that lease, because oftentimes you'll get a lease, an operator will get a lease, and it'll be 5 years out to exercise that option. So if you get nothing out of what I'm saying today and you're out there, you're a restaurant operator, go to your lease right now. Look and see, is there an option? What are those parameters? Because the minute that you're outside of those parameters to exercise the option, you go to month to month. And what does that mean? You're vulnerable to the landlord. Might keep you on, but the landlord can now negotiate lease terms, whatever the lease terms the landlord wants. Because when you negotiate those options inside of the lease, the terms of those options are already determined inside the lease. So certainly base rent changes when you exercise the option. Sometimes it will go, plus the CPI, the consumer price index of the prevailing index. Like in our area, it's usually out of San Francisco, or it might go to market rate, where the landlord and the tenant get commercial brokers, and they decide what the prevailing commercial rate is in that area. Or it might just escalate in a bound percentage that's detailed in the lease. And the options the rent will increase in the options differently most of the time. The first option, it might have one protocol, and the second option another protocol. But the same thing holds to both options. They have to be exercised, and they have to be exercised in a very legal way, in a time-bound fashion. So let's say I'm working with a buyer, that buyer needs to get it in their calendar. If they've only got 3 years left in the term, 3 years or 2 years and 4 months from now, contact the landlord to exercise that option. There's a lot of horror stories out there in the world around options. It's a very robust topic. I'm just hitting the main points. But that's going to be it for today. I am going to announce the winner of Legit Provisions, which is in St. Helena in Napa County, California. $100 gift card goes to my friend Charles White, who actually owns and operates Cozy Plum, the plant-based eatery in Sebastopol. Hi, Charles. I'll contact you about this. And if you would like the chance to win a $100 gift card to Lo and Behold Bar and Kitchen up in Healdsburg, where we are today, please like and comment on this post now, tomorrow, 30 days from now, before Ed and I meet again to do episode 17. Today is episode 16. Title of this one today is Lease Options to Extend. What's what? And without further confinement, I think I'll say happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody, and we'll see you next month. Bye.